What surprise will he spring on May the 9th? All eyes on Vladimir Putin ahead of what's become, on his watch, the most sacred day on the Russian calendar. Victory Day in World War II means remembrance of the estimated 26 million who lost their lives while turning the tide in what's dubbed there the Great Patriotic War. Will the Russian president use the commemoration of World War II as a bookend to call time on an invasion of Ukraine he justified as a special military operation to de-nazify the country? Or will Putin take it to the next level and announce a mass mobilization? We'll ask why World War II still matters so much in 2022, and why Moscow is even willing to embark in a war of words with traditional ally Israel by branding Ukraine's Jewish president a Nazi at the head of an anti-Semitic government, says the Kremlin. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking why May the 9th matters so much. Joining us, journalist Vladislav Davidson, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, author of From Odessa with Love. And you were in Odessa just a few days ago.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just came back.
We'll talk more about that in a moment. From the village of East Bergholt in England, Natasha Court is lecturer in the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi.
From the UK capital, Aglia Snetkov, lecturer at University College London. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
And we welcome back Anton Kozlov, director of the International Center for the Study of Eurasia. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have, on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Well, rehearsal flyovers in Moscow spotted this Wednesday, all part of preparations for next Monday's big annual military parade, one whose stature has grown under Vladimir Putin to the point that remembrance of the Great Patriotic War for liberation was enshrined in 2020 in the preamble to the Constitution. Anton Kozlov, VE Day here in France, which in most of Europe, which is May the 8th, because it was signed late at night,
right.
The armistice, and therefore it was already May the 9th.
Well, I think that the Americans and the British signed separately, and then the Russians did. That's why we have this discrepancy.
But what's your memory of a Victory Day in Moscow?
Well, first of all, I'm not from Moscow. I was born in St. Petersburg. Second of all, I don't really have any real memories.
Yeah, have you been there when there was Victory Day?
I've been once to Moscow in 1992 when it was already a post-Soviet period, and I remember seeing war veterans in the square right next to the Bolshoi Theater dancing and singing and kind of celebrating. But I hadn't had a chance to go to watch the parade, and I must say that until probably maybe 25 years ago, it wasn't as frantic as it is now. And we know that the V-Day, they started to celebrate in the Soviet Union only in 1965. It became an important national holiday. So no, I don't have any memories of the actual military parade.
Yeah, 1965, there'd been this 20-year hiatus, Victory Day military parades on Red Square returning to fashion. That was under Leonid Brezhnev. The importance growing over time. Do you agree, Aglaya Snetkov, that it's really in the last 20 years that it's become such a big deal?
So I think so I grew up also in St. Petersburg, and I also didn't visit the May parades in Moscow during the Soviet Union, although I have been in Moscow during the preparation of the Victory Day parades. I think the Victory Day itself was definitely very important already when I was sort of growing up. I grew up in St. Petersburg. The memory of the war was very, very important to my grandparents' generation. So it was definitely very important, and I can see why it would be very important for Putin, having sort of lost his brother during the Second World War, etc. I think Putin has definitely upped the commemoration of World War II as he's become a lot more patriotic and has sort of galvanized the narrative of Great Russia, because for him, Great Russia really goes back to sort of the 1945, the victory over Nazism, and the fact that, and I think this is important, that from the Russian point of view, they were on the right side of history. And from then on, you almost couldn't criticize the Russians for anything because they saved Europe from Nazism. And Nazism in Russia and in Europe is seen as sort of the greatest evil living on earth, if you like. And therefore, so the commemoration of Victory Day have increased over the last few years. Something else to keep in mind is that in the Russian sort of calendar, spring calendar, if you like, there is this period, which is sort of the spring holidays, where people are off work for a couple of weeks. It's a combination of sort of Victory Day, but also the 1st of May. Often Easter also coincides. So there is this long period around sort of end of April, May, when a lot of Russians are kind of off on holidays. The state and the leadership sort of commemorates 1945. And so it becomes a sort of general kind of almost spring celebration, if you like, culminating in this very militaristic kind of parade.
Yeah, we project why, Natasha Kort, has Putin decided to enshrine the victory in World War II in the Constitution, in those amendments he made in 2020?
Well, I think, as Aglaya has just pointed out, the centrality of the Second World War and the victory there, it's a very important source of legitimation for the regime. I think it was already obviously an additional source of legitimation for the Soviet regime. But I think as, the kind of victory, the annexation rather of Crimea, and the kind of increased popularity, concomitant popularity of Putin in the wake of that annexation in Russia, as that was beginning perhaps to wear a bit thin and popularity ratings were falling, this again also is a way of bringing together the Russian people. It also, I think, I would also say that the victory very much links to also Russia's seat on the UN Security Council, because, of course, the UN was established in 1945, to save the world from the scourge of war. And those who acquired a UN Security Council seat were the victors in that war. So there's very much an important linkage for Russia there too.
Yeah, so grounding in legitimacy, and then it's taken to another level after the annexation in 2014 in Crimea. The New York Times describing at the time a thundering Victory Day parade in Moscow. Putin the same day, then going to newly annexed Crimea, arriving by sea in the port of Sevastopol to review the troops there as the fighting raged in not too far off Mariupol on that day. And again, World War II lore central to Putin's discourse when he talked ahead of the February invasion of Ukraine. He gave a long speech where he described back in February Ukraine as an invention gifted by the Soviets. 2 days later, he harked back to World War II as he appealed directly to the Ukrainian people.
Dear comrades, your fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers did not fight the Nazis, defending our common homeland, so that today's neo-Nazis would seize power in Ukraine. You gave an oath of allegiance to the Ukrainian people and not to the anti-people junta, which robs and tortures those very people. Don't follow its criminal orders.
Vladislav Davidson, you think back to February the 24th, when you hear Vladimir Putin using the word de-nazification. Anybody who lives in the former Soviet Union, what do they understand by that?
I mean, it's obviously a code word for evil. I mean, it's just a metonym for the concept of evil, in the sense that that was what bound the people of the Soviet Union together for a generation after the war. I mean, it created a kind of glue for keeping the Soviet Union together after the embers and the fire and the fiery emotions of the revolution had ebbed out. You needed a kind of political ideology. So in that same sense, the Putin regime now, which is basically a kleptocracy, which worships greater Russian chauvinism and basically security, and the security of the wealth amassed by the people around Putin, they need an ideology. It's not just postmodernism. It's just, it's just a kleptocracy. So they settle on this as a kind of glue for keeping all sorts of people together, because there really isn't an economic or a political project for contemporary Putinism otherwise.
It's all based on the World War II. That's the glue for.
I mean, it's not all based on it, but it's the kind of pinnacle of the thing that they put together, the package of ideas and the package of values that they cobble together. But they don't really have anything else to sell to the population. They're not actually saying we're an empire. We're not saying we're going to make life better for people. There's nothing there in terms of giving a lot of different people, really different people from 13 different time zones and dozens of different nationalities, a reason for living together in sort of harmony. So you have myths, and this is a myth of the past as opposed to the Ukrainian vision of the future. So one goes back and the other one goes forward.
Is it that simple, Anton Kozlov?
Well, I think there is certainly true in the sense that the victory in World War II or in the Great Patriotic War is the source of legitimation of Putin's regime. Putin's regime never had and does not have any structured ideology.
It's drawn closer to the Russian Orthodox Church.
Well, it's not an ideology in itself. Besides, there is a clear separation between the church and state and the Constitution of Russia. So I think it's important. They don't have any ideas.
But it talks about a greater Russia.
Yeah, but it doesn't really mean much, because I think when they refer, which Russia are they talking about? They're talking about the Imperial Russia of the St. Petersburg Empire, or they're talking about the Muscovite Russia that preceded the empire. We have different Russias there, and they're actually very, very different. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to give legitimacy to a social structure that lacks coherency, different ideologies that lack coherency. We have communists, we have national chauvinists, we have liberals, we have all sorts of people. They are supposed to be living together. They all disagree with one another, and the government must somehow find a modality of keeping everything together. And they're not doing a very good job, and they never did. So they came up with this idea of fighting Nazism, which is frankly, doesn't sound very convincing to me.
Doesn't sound very convincing here in the climate-controlled television studio in Paris. It is a big buzzword these days on the airwaves in Moscow. It's a France 24 report by Elena Volochin, read by Jean-Emile Jamin.
Yubov Zanozina
leads a small group of poets and amateur musicians. Today they're performing for the patients of a rehabilitation center in the Moscow suburbs.
Our performance today will be dedicated to the heroes.
It's a show dedicated to supporting the special operation of the de-nazification of Ukraine, as Russian propaganda puts it.
Gangs and Nazis, educated by the Western enemy, were massacring people. In short, modern fascists who hate peace.
The poem is received with fervor. This audience all believe the parallel reality that Russian propaganda tells them. A reality in which Russia will liberate and save Ukraine from a genocide perpetrated by Nazis.
Once again, their duty of honor throws the sons of Russia into battle. Once again, they will save people from monsters. We are not fighting Ukraine. We are fighting Nazism, Nazi symbolism, Nazi education. We are fighting the West, which has aligned Ukraine with its principles.
These ordinary Russians even believe in a purification of Ukraine.
We let go of Ukraine for 30 years, and look what happened. It has come under the influence of the West. It has changed, and now it is in this form. We must purge it.
How many Russians share this point of view? To find out, we went to the center of Moscow, where propaganda is omnipresent.
War is where people are killed, but this is an operation to ensure Russia's security.
It's definitely a special operation. It's not a war.
There's no other choice. I completely agree with our president.
Some are more afraid to answer.
Excuse us for being careful, we're against it.
We take it back.
Out of 21 passers-by interviewed, 8 said they were in favor of this special operation. 7 were against the war. 6 did not want to answer.
So, Aglaya Znetkov, you heard a dubious Anton Kozlov, and then you see in that report how this talk of denazification works.
It does. I mean, as ludicrous, and I would call it ludicrous, as the current discourse is from the Russian government, I think that there is some parts of the Russian population that are sort of, I'm not saying they're buying it wholesale, but they kind of will nod along and go, yeah, something is going on there, we need to sort it out. And I think that that's something to keep in mind about President Putin, is one thing he's good at, and I mean it in a sort of entre guillemets, is he's very good at throwing out a lot of narratives and seeing what sticks. And that's how he tends to pick his official narrative. That tends to change every 5 to 10 years. And this one is going for sort of the Nazism, and it's surprising to us, but it seems that there is some resonance on the ground. If there was absolutely no resonance on the ground, I don't think that the regime would have pushed for that. They would have picked some other potentially equally ludicrous kind of storyline to go along to explain what is currently going on in Ukraine. But it's also something to remember is that the denazification of Ukraine is potentially a myth, a storyline that the Russians have grown up with over the course of, let's say, Soviet period. Because even I grew up, and I have family in Ukraine, with the sort of the stories of the Soviets fighting Nazis, fighting the Forest brothers in Ukraine after the end of World War II. So there was already this kind of seed of the narrative of fighting Nazis in Ukraine after World War II. And I think this is essentially what the Putin regime has gone with, has sort of tried to, I don't know, flare up and trying to sell to the Russian people. It's sort of a nugget of something that they've already heard of, that they can sort of extrapolate and create this quite, ludicrous and quite horrific and just absurd picture of, of what the Russians have sold as going on in Ukraine, when in reality, of course, this is absolutely not the picture that we are seeing from the developments actually on the ground in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, so there is something that stays in people's minds, especially when it comes to Russia's sacrifice, when it comes to all of the former Soviet Union's sacrifice during World War II. One of the mainstays of Victory Day, not just in Moscow, by the way, the March of the Immortal Regiment. It takes place in other countries, too. Back in 2018, the president of Serbia and the then Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, marched alongside Vladimir Putin. Netanyahu holding the portrait of a Lithuanian-born Soviet war hero who later emigrated to Israel. These days, all the talk of denazification, well, that's souring relations between Russia and the Jewish state, particularly after the Russian foreign minister's remarks targeting Ukraine's Jewish president.
Но то, что аргумент он выдвигает, какая может быть у нас нацификация.
He makes an argument. What kind of Nazification can they have if he's a Jew? I could be wrong, but Hitler also had Jewish blood. That means absolutely nothing. Wise Jewish people say that the most rabid anti-Semites tend to be Jews. There's always a bad seed in the family, as we say.
Как правило, евреи. Не без урода, в семье не без урода, как у нас говорят.
The remarks of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are an unforgivable scandal. Hitler was not from Jewish descendants, and the Jews didn't kill themselves during the Holocaust. We make every effort to keep good relations with Russia, but there's a limit, and this limit has been crossed this time. The government of Russia needs to apologize to us and to the Jewish people.
Vladislav Davidson, it's a very rare occurrence for a Russian ambassador to be called in Tel Aviv, and yet that's what's happened this week as a result of this. Russia potentially alienating one of the few countries that's trying to sit the fence here.
That's right.
And a potential ally at times in the Middle East.
So this is utterly remarkable because of how silly it is from the standpoint of the Russians' own interests and their own narrative, and how deeply deeply interested, the Israeli state is not getting involved in this, despite the tremendous pressure being put on the Israelis.
Sergei Lavrov is a seasoned diplomat. He doesn't do things impulsively. So why is he doing this?
He's absolutely a seasoned diplomat. So basically, it's a problem of cognitive dissonance for people in the West and for some people in Russia. How is it that Ukraine, which is a liberal democracy whose president is a Jew, who I've discussed with President Zelensky in private his views on Judaism. The last time I saw him in person, we had dinner in 2019. The defense minister, by the way, is a Jew, and the chief of staff, Mr. Yermak, is of Jewish descent. So you have this remarkable situation where you have a state going totally all in to kind of fascist craziness with no capacity for other kinds of liberal democratic opposition to it, going into a war against its neighbor, which is run by Russian-speaking Jewish elite, and I don't mean elite in the conspiratorial sense, but actually in the sense of the people who are running the state. The president, the minister of defense, and the chief of staff are all of Jewish descent, and accusing them of fascism. It's remarkable. And when you do have the pushback from lots of quarters, the Russians have to say something. And you could say, well, of course, there are Jews who are actually fascists. And wasn't Hitler himself a Jew, and weren't the Jews themselves really the ones who are responsible for all this? So that's the way the rhetoric rolls. And there's a 60-year-old history of this rhetoric.
But why are they arguing the point? That's what I want to know.
Because they're stupid. I mean, this is really...
Are they?
Yeah, well, no, this is an argument they're always going to lose. And so to get into an argument where you're going to lose with Israel when it doesn't want to get into this argument but needs to is stupid. So I would say that they're stupid because A is B and then B is C and then D. That's logic.
Natasha Kort, is this how you read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like a very self-defeating kind of argument in the way they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot because, as has been mentioned, Israel was really kind of reluctant, if you like, to really weigh in on either side until now. So, perhaps Russia is trying to just, ensure that, everybody is against them. And then they can point to the fact that, yes, look, everybody is against us. I mean, that's the only strategy that I can imagine it could possibly be. But I guess there is a history in the Soviet Union of, talking about Jews as rootless cosmopolitans and so on, and the enemy within. But it still doesn't really make that much sense.
Everybody's against us. How central is that?
I think it's very central. Obviously, everyone's against us apart from China and maybe India, for example. But I think that is part of the kind of mobilization in a way, which is, if you like, to essentially say, look, everyone is everyone is helping Ukraine. Everyone is helping to escalate the conflict by sending weapons and so on to Ukraine. And meanwhile, poor Russia is isolated trying to fight these Nazis. So I think that is very much part of the narrative.
Very much part of the narrative. We're heading now towards that May 9th date. And we're seeing that Vladimir Putin does not have a win to show for it at this point. The latest map of the fighting shows only piecemeal gains. According to one top Ukrainian lawmaker, Russian forces have entered now Mariupol's Azovstal plant, where there's the last pocket of resistance in that Azov Sea port city on the part of the Ukrainians. Our reporter on in Kyiv was saying earlier, Anton Kozlov, how one of the things they may be planning is, there's talk of it, some kind of a Victory Day parade in Mariupol, that would be one of the ways for Russia to have a win to show for itself on the day.
Well, I frankly, I wouldn't know. I doubt that because I don't think it would be safe to have a V-Day parade in Mariupol because fighting is not over and we don't know whether it's going to be over by the 9th of May. I think they're going to have it in Moscow. And what's going to happen on the 9th, we heard, I mean, there was a story about Putin declaring general mobilization or declaring war on Ukraine.
Which the Kremlin this Wednesday denied. They say
Right.
there's not going to be the announcement of a mass mobilization of Russian.
Well, I mean, they probably will not, but I would say that to take what their declaration at face value, I think it's we've seen for how long they've been saying that they're not going to invade Ukraine, November, December, January, and February, and then they invaded. So frankly, their credibility is kind of at the.
So, Glayas Netkov, I suppose you're not expecting Vladimir Putin to display a mission accomplished banner on May the 9th.
No, I don't think so. Realistically, even if right now, at this point, the Russians would declare a ceasefire, obviously this would not work in practice because it does not mean that the Ukrainian side is going to lay down their arms and agree to a ceasefire, because the war has actually shifted. And now Russia is more on the defensive. And, just because Putin says something doesn't mean it actually happens in Ukraine. But I think none of us on the panel can predict what happens on the 9th of May. But I think this points to a few interesting sort of issues. One, which is the extent to which this war is seen by everyone as being a Putin war, i.e., it's down to Putin, and we just have to wait for Putin to announce something or not announce something on the 9th of May.
Because one of our correspondents is convinced that come what may, he will make some kind of big announcement. Do you agree with that?
I think a lot of commentators need to have some clarity about what's going to happen. And I think we want to know. And people have focused on the 9th of May as this period and moment of revelation. But actually, the Russian leadership has not indicated in any way that anything is going to happen. And it doesn't have to happen. General mobilization will be very difficult for the Russian public to swallow. For the Putin regime, it's very dangerous because it actually brings the Russian public on board to a much greater extent than they've been involved up till now. The biggest, in many ways, the Russian public has been disinterested in the war. It's not that they actively support what's going on in Ukraine, it's that they're basically disengaged. General mobilization actually forces the Russian public to engage. And I'm not sure the Putin regime is that confident that the public will be on side. So it doesn't mean that he can call general mobilization, and that's a sort of a fail-safe move for him. But he does have a problem, which is the Russian army lacks manpower. And so there is a question of how do you square a circle, which is to bring more Russian men into the military without pushing the Russian public against you. So there is definitely a problem. There is definitely a question as to what happens on the 9th of May. But I think the fact that we're all fascinated with the 9th of May kind of points to how little we know about the Russian endgame, what Putin actually thinks about this war, and what the Russian regime is capable of doing in practice, not only in Ukraine, but also vis-a-vis their own sort of public and their own population.
Natasha Kort, have you any clarity on what we can expect next Monday?
Well, I'll look into my crystal ball and tell you, but I think it could very well just be, a kind of general sort of celebration, maybe, of what's been achieved so far, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to pull out any troops, but, they can celebrate what they've achieved or what they think they've achieved, largely liberating Donbass, a certain level of denazification, and so on. And obviously also they could frame the elimination of the Azov battalion in Mariupol as a kind of victory as well. So it may just be kind of celebrating themselves, if you like, in a kind of huge kind of patriotic fervor.
Vladislav Davidson, you agree?
I do agree that all three courses go of course, escalation and de-escalation, which are open to the Kremlin, have their own pros and cons in terms of unreliable betting. If I was in the Kremlin, I am a betting man actually, so I actually will say that there's not going to be anything big happening. You can all attack me when something big does happen next week. I don't think they're going to do anything. First of all, the war has been going on only for 75 days. 2.5 months feels a lot like a lot to all of us, including me. I just came back from Rubezhny, sleeping under Russian grad bombing, and it's horrific. But 2.5 months actually not so much if you look at the war in Syria, if you look at other long-term wars. This war's been going on for 8 years.
But Vladimir Putin knows that we're in this kind of transitional phase. He's pivoted towards the east and focusing squarely on that now. At the same time, he sees those weapons coming in to the Ukrainian side from the west. Soon, a lot of that heavy weaponry will be more available to the Ukrainian side. Is it a race against time for him?
It absolutely is a race against time for him. Time is not on his side. If he's not able to rearm because of because of all that we've done in the West in terms of sanctions. It's hard to get parts from the West. It's hard to get all sorts of exotic replacement equipment that they relied on, that they didn't think that they would have to source in the middle of such a war of attrition. Both the Russians and Ukrainians are duking it out all over the world, quietly buying up everything that they can. There's a secret arms race going on from South America to China, from Serbia to Africa. Whatever each side can get its hands on, they're buying up as quickly as possible. And the Ukrainians have time on their side because they're fighting a defensive war, and they're trading territory for time, as any defender who's weaker and has less air power and artillery power should do, while the Russians are losing with every passing day. They're having less.
And
less,
you heard Aglyasnetkov say that even if the Kremlin was to decree a ceasefire, it doesn't mean the other side would agree to it. Tell me a little bit more about what you saw on that score when you were near the front line.
I saw horrific artillery battles. I saw the Ukrainians reinforcing the line from every side. We were on our way out, and we saw 3 entire battalions just a week ago. 3 entire battalions in the way through Dnipro. Based on the highway they were coming out of, they were probably coming out of the west from Lviv. So the Ukrainians had reformatted, refitted, retrofitted, rearmed, remanned an entire 3 battalions worth of tanks and artillery. And these guys were coming in as I was leaving with some Ukrainian reconnaissance officers, another journalist in a car, and I saw a lot of new young men. I saw 70 to 80% of the young men that I was speaking to having been mobilized in the last 2 months. I saw the Ukrainian population, even from Western Ukraine, who wouldn't have fought a year ago because they saw the war as something happening in Donbass and Donetsk, as joining up now because Lviv was getting bombed now. I saw a Ukrainian army with no manpower issues, but issues with getting more ammo and artillery. I saw the Russian army destroying as much as it could with artillery, and causing tremendous losses big losses, not tremendous losses, to Ukrainians through artillery fire. I did not see yet the World War II style battles that we were promised. I saw the beginning of an all-out assault that the Russians had not yet started.
The Russians had not yet started, and right now you have this situation again with the Russians pounding Mariupol.
Yeah.
Mariupol, where that last pocket of resistance is keeping a lot of Russian battalions mobilized. The minute that falls, how big a problem is it for the rest of that southeastern front on the Ukrainian side?
There are 12 BTGs, the guys who keep track of the military formations, tied up in Mariupol. The Russians.
So that's roughly what? That's how many?
12. What's
somewhere between 700 and 1,200. Soldiers?
A Russian BTG will be like 850 troops or 1,000 troops, but probably about 10 to 14,000 troops probably. I mean, they're at half strength. What's a Russian BTG? I mean, they're smaller. They're smaller than Western because they have a lot more artillery and a lot more tanks, but fewer complement of troops. Basically, they're tying up about 10,000 troops and a lot of.
So if Mariupol. Again, that last pocket of resistance falls, does it change anything?
I mean, I'm from Odessa. I just came back from Odessa. If you do free up the troops in Mariupol and some of them in Donetsk, you could push more troops into Nikolaev or into the northern axis onto Slavyansk from Izium. You can go into the Dnipro pocket from Izium, or you can go out of Kherson into Nikolaev if you're the Russians. Depending on what they want to do, and they've announced that those are their two objectives, they could either push forward into the rest of the Donbass and try to bisect the country and then partition it through taking Dnipro, which will be very difficult, or they can try to lock the Ukrainians out of access to the sea by taking Nikolaev and then eventually my ancestral Odessa, and then linking up with Transnistria. But both those things are fairly hard to do, and it would be easier actually just to try to take a lot more territory in the Donbass. It's not going to be easy for them either way.
Anton Kozlov, are we right to and we can look at that map now of where the fighting is taking place. Are we right to focus on this May 9th date when you hear Vladislav Davidson describe what could be a long war of attrition?
Well, I think that's certainly a possibility, because I think, Russia, today I have very strong doubts that Russians have strategic objectives beyond securing a land corridor from Crimea to Mariupol and securing the water canal.
Some say all the way to Transnistria.
I don't think so. I don't believe they're going to do that, because they don't have enough manpower, they don't have enough everything, and I'm pretty sure they don't know themselves now what they're going to do next, simply because the first week of war clearly demonstrated that it doesn't go, or it didn't go the way it was planned. And, the famous Clausewitz and friction is at work. So nobody knows what's going on.
I want to just absolutely say that's correct. They would love to take Odessa. If they could, they'd take it tomorrow, but they can't. I arrived in Odessa over the Moldovan border on March 15th, right before the Jewish Passover, and right as I was traversing the border, right as the Russian battleship Moskva was sinking, and it was obvious already the next day that the Ukrainian authorities were no longer worried about Russian Black Sea Fleet amphibious landings in Odessa. I say this for fact because they started deconstructing the fortifications and the tank turrets and the barbed wire on Zirbasovskaya Street in Odessa on the 16th and the 17th. It was obvious already in mid-March to anyone who's actually on the streets of Odessa that the Ukrainian authorities, I saw the mayor on the 21st of the mayor of Odessa, and he basically said to me, they're not going to come through Odessa now. It's becoming less and less likely that they will take the south of Ukraine because they simply do not have the military assets or the capacity. They're going to be concentrating in the Donbass.
Glasnetkov, if Vladimir Putin doesn't get a win, he has a loss, doesn't he? Does he not? And you heard there from Vladislav's testimony of how Ukrainians see this as an existential battle. Is it going to become an existential battle for Putin himself?
So they have definitely been trying to present the picture to the Russian people that it is Russia's war against the West, and that it's the West fighting Russia in Ukraine as a sort of a proxy war. I think that's definitely true. And I think Putin is and has always been concerned about regime survival. That's been at the heart of his regime kind of over the last 20 years. Is regime survival is number one priority. But I think that what we don't know at this stage, and because we will be entering into a war of attrition, is how long this conflict will carry on for. There have been different scenarios as to whether or not the Russians can only sustain this for another month, another few months. But the reality is we don't kind of know how the war changes, and we don't know how the situation changes on the ground in Russia. At this stage, I think Putin can still sell the war in any way he likes to the Russian public, because the war has only been going on for a couple of months. And, as devastating as it's been, is quite short. But, the mood of the public might very well change over the next sort of coming, months or maybe even years, as already been mentioned. The war in Syria has been going on for 8 years. And so at this stage, I think that's something to keep in mind, is that there is a lot of uncertainty. There is different dynamics of the war on the ground in Ukraine, and the question as to whether or not the Russians will be able to, make anything there. But also, yes, the question of sort of the domestic public, whether or not the Russian public will continue to at least sort of passively support what the regime is doing in Ukraine, whether or not, sanctions continuing to hit the Russian public, whether or not that changes the mood. So it is a sort of a big unknown. And the regime is clearly concerned about that. And I think that's why at this stage they haven't called for mobilization, because them calling the war a special military operation is not simply a euphemism. It's a legal term. It means that the Russian army has to fight at its current numbers. And for general mobilization, therefore, calling it a war would allow that to be increased and would allow the Russian army to be larger on the ground in Ukraine. The fact that they haven't done that, I think, suggests to some extent that the regime doesn't trust the Russian public. So as tacitly as the Russian public currently supports it, I don't know if this will carry on or that the regime is confident in that.
Anton Kozlov, it's going to stay a special military operation?
I think it's going to stay a special military operation. I also think I would like to just say that contemporary war, fighting contemporary war, is a very costly business. It is, and Russia certainly cannot be compared to the Soviet Union of 1941, ideologically, in terms of popular mobilization and so on and so forth. It is a very different country, and to fight a war, a protracted war for a year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't think it can afford. Financially, economically, politically, Putin has presidential elections in 2024. So I think it's a mess that he somehow has to find a way out of this mess. How he will find it, I don't know. But I also would like to say that you cannot compare this even to war in Syria, because Syria, Bashar was allied with Iran, with Russia. He was assisted by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Russia doesn't have any allies in this war. That is another issue. Russia never fought any war in the Western Front without allies. This is for the first time that it does that. So, and I'm not talking about the 1939 war with Finland, because I call it a war, up in the north.
Right. Natasha Kurt, you heard Aglaya mention that Vladimir Putin portraying this as a proxy war with the West. At this juncture, does he draw in the West directly?
The $1 million or million ruble question. I think that the West will still very much avoid trying to be drawn in. I don't think that, despite the support for Ukraine, I think it would be very difficult for Western leaders to really sell the idea of body bags coming home. So I don't really see that, but I think we can still do a lot more to support Ukraine. And of course, people say we supported Ukraine militarily far too late, but we can do a lot still to ramp up that military support.
Vladislav Davidson, your final word on this?
It's not too late to support the Ukrainians. And by the way, they don't need more men. They have enough men. They have a mobilized population. They have all the men and a lot of the young women that they need fighting on the front and volunteering. They need more tanks. They need more artillery. They need ammo resupply. They need more S-300s. They need air cover. And we don't need the Europeans and the Romanians to provide that air cover. We need to give anti-air defense systems to the Ukrainians so that they can provide their own air cover, so that they can keep it from. I see this man wants to say something. My man Anton, my pal, wants to say something. We can absolutely do more to help the Ukrainians, and we should. And it's not too late. And I hope everything in terms of the liberal democratic order for the future stands on that question. We should.
One sentence, because we're out of time.
No, I think we have to find, or both sides should find a diplomatic way out of this war, because a poor peace is better than a good war.
All right, well, that'll be the final word for now. Anton Kozlov, I want to thank you. I want to thank Vladislav Davidson, Natasha Kurt, and Aglia Snetkov for joining us here in the France 24 debate.